Meanwhile, the East Coast is still picking up the pieces 2 weeks after Hurricane Sandy ravaged homes and communities. As if the superstorm wasn't bad enough, the latest nor'easter storm may have slowed that process down significantly, as FEMA and other government agencies are still trying to rectify the situation. But out of the darkness from the damage and destruction caused by Superstorm Sandy, a ray of economic hope. Private companies are teaming up with the public sector to rebuild infrastructure damaged by the superstorm. Everything from homes to tunnels to roads are in the need of repair all along the eastern seaboard, and businesses will no doubt benefit from the reconstruction efforts, and possibly the economy might benefit as well. So to discuss all of this is RT producer Rachel Kurzius. She joins me in the studio now. Hey there, Rachel. So go ahead and break this down for me. How are these private businesses contributing? What kind of contracts do they have? And what does this mean for the East Coast?
Sure. So there are two major ways that public-private partnerships can work in this regard. The first way is that essentially private businesses take over for the government. So for instance, they'll essentially buy a road off of the government, and after that they'll benefit, say they'll have to deal with all of the repairs and things of that nature, but at the same time they get all of the revenue from tolls and from any other sort of profit generating revenue, like even, rent along the side of the road, things like that. The other way to do it is to actually have the businesses from the outset be the ones who build the roads to begin with. And I think that's what we're going to see a little bit more in the wake of Superstorm Sandy, seeing as these roads are entirely destroyed to begin with. So instead of having a bond measure wherein the government borrows money off of taxpayers to pay for these new roads, what they'll do is they'll essentially bid out those roads to businesses who will then do it and again take all of the revenue in from having built it. It'll essentially be their road that they build for the sake of the government.
So talk about what the East Coast would potentially look like under these kind of this kind of partnership. Are we going to see tolls on every road? And it also, I want to bring up the fact that if it is that these roads are going to be paid for by tolls, is there really any difference between charging people taxes and these tolls?
That's a really fantastic point, and I think that that's exactly how we've got to look at it. So you're saying, people are saying, oh, well, we don't have to borrow money to pay for it, but instead it's kind of a penny-wise, pound-foolish policy, because when the government issues a bond in order to pay something, they continue to have control over, for instance, how much the tolls will cost over time. As soon as you have something like a private enterprise taking over, you'll see that that's not the case anymore. They can raise the tolls pretty much whenever they want. They have something called non-compete clauses, which means that governments, say, won't be able to build another road or bridge nearby because it may compete with the ability for the privately owned road to raise revenue and things of that nature. I want to bring up an example of something that happened in 2008 that was essentially a public-private partnership that, in my opinion, has gone a bit awry. In Chicago, Mayor Daley in 2008 essentially leased out all of the Chicago parking meters, 36,000 of them. It's the third largest kind of parking meter group in the country. They leased it out for 75 years to a Morgan Stanley group that had essentially assembled. That was $1.15 billion, which seems like a lot of money, much of which was used to plug up budget holes and things of that nature so that Daley could pay for public employees. The issue is that new research coming out shows that over these 75 years, what's actually happening is that they're going to make, this Morgan Stanley group is going to make $11.6 billion out of the deal altogether. Now, the way they're going to do that is they've already boosted rates. They're changing around the parking so that you can fit in more cars, which is a good thing if you're really good at parallel parking. A lot of people, myself included, aren't, so that's a little disconcerting. And they're adding hours that require fees. Often, after 6 p.m., you're fine not to add in money. That's not the case in Chicago anymore. Another issue is that, let's say I want to have a street fair. I can't close off the street because by contract, those parking meters have to keep running to make sure that this company is making money.
And Rachel, that's a really good example that you bring up. However, what I am seeing in the different articles that are being written about this is that, it's no secret that these states, these cities are in some type of a budget crunch, and that this storm only adds on to it. But from what I'm understanding, it could actually be cheaper for these private entities to make these public roads. But you're arguing that that's in the short term. You're arguing that in the long term, it can actually not be cheaper.
I think it's really difficult to determine the value, say, of parking tolls, or excuse me, parking meters, of road tolls over the course of 75 years. When you lend something out for that long of a period of time, you have no idea how much money you could be losing. And I think that, in particular, there's a lot of secrecy regarding these deals. In the case of Chicago, for instance, Mayor Daley proposed this idea only 2 days before it went to a council vote. That's very little time for independent groups, for the inspector general, for people like that to actually go in and determine whether or not this is an effective deal for the people of Chicago. And I think over time we've learned that it's not. That again, over time, they're actually losing a lot more revenue in order to plug up these short-term budget holes.
And Rachel, let's go ahead and talk about what type of a say the citizens have, if any, in this private-public partnership.
Yeah, well, as I said before, I think a lot of it is really guarded in secrecy. Not only the fact that these deals and contracts aren't presented until right before they're made actionable, but another issue is that they're entirely written in legalese. They're written in jargon, and it's really difficult for a normal person to look at this and say, oh, let me see. This over time is not going to cost us that much money, or it will. I think that the analysis is very difficult to determine. So there at least needs to be more time given. And in the case of Hurricane Sandy, there are people in New Jersey and New York and all over the eastern seaboard who are certainly suffering right now. So I think that time is of the essence, and I would think it would be hasty to immediately sign on to a really long-term partnership with a business whose main goal is profit. I mean, let's face it, they're trying to make money. And the thing is, when we're talking about infrastructure, infrastructure is something that should be for the benefit of citizens. So over time, I think that maybe these two things aren't as aligned as we'd like them to be.
And Rachel, we only have about 30 seconds left, but what you're saying is you're not necessarily opposed to the private sector stepping in, just to clarify, but maybe with a little bit more regulation, maybe with a little bit more explanation as to what's going
on. But also the thing is, investors only really want to invest in things that are going to be profitable. That means that the government is selling off things like, say, the Eastern Corridor, which are very profitable for private businesses, but then say, look at the Midwest. The government is going to have to continue to pay for all of those things. No investors are going to come in. The government is losing revenue that could actually boost them and still being in charge of, roads and infrastructure that no one else is interested in paying for.
RT producer Rachel Kurzius, thank you for that insight.
Yeah, thanks for having me.